can't kill Nintendo. Nintendo will live on. Sega tried to kill Nintendo, but they failed as they were BTF. Oh. Sony tried to kill Nintendo, but they failed as the low times were a bunch of crap. Xbox tried to kill Nintendo. They failed as they had no Japan sales.
The year is 2024 and gamers are still upset at what Jeff tried to do at the Game Awards. I've been talking about this all year, and when it happened in 2023, I swore off the Game Awards immediately, right? Because 2023 was a particularly bad year for the show, right? They really tried tricking an entire audience into thinking that Baldur's Gate 3 and Alan Wake 2 were worthy of, like, being nominated for Game of the Year over Hogwarts Legacy, okay? Like, it was a complete travesty, and I think more and more people are starting to notice that and talk about it. And I do think the big audience that is willing to stand up and talk about how Jeff completely dropped the ball are Nintendo fans. Now, I've talked at length about how Tears of the Kingdom is an absolute masterpiece and really should be discussed more in game enthusiast circles. Right now, it's going through the typical Zelda cycle thing of the audience pretending that the last game was a masterpiece, while the new game is just not all that great. And this happens with every major Zelda release, right? It's not a new thing. It's a known phenomenon. By the time the next game comes out, I think more people will understand what Tears of the Kingdom is and its unique strengths. It reminds me a lot of Majora's Mask in that way, right? It is an underappreciated masterpiece. It took everything Breath of the Wild did well and really improved on it in really great, innovative ways. And I really, really wish more people acknowledged it as the absolute masterpiece as it is. But of course, game journals are spearheading the charge against Nintendo, doing everything in their power to kind of downplay and pretend the game isn't as big of a deal. And I do think a big thing in the West that's becoming a really big issue, actually has been for a very long time, is the treatment of Zelda producer Eiji Aonuma, right? This guy has been blamed for everything quote-unquote wrong with Zelda since the reveal of The Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker at Space World 2000, right? You know, the game is cartoony. It's not for us real adult gamers, right? It was a cope then and it was a cope now. The reality is that the audience that grew up with the original NES games had aged past like Nintendo's target demographic, and Nintendo was producing games for a new audience, people who never even heard of the original NES Zelda, right? You know, when I first played Wind Waker, I had not yet played the original NES Zelda. So for me, you know, buying, playing, experiencing Wind Waker the first time, it was a magical experience. Yeah, did I prefer Ocarina? Absolutely. I still prefer Ocarina, but there's no denying that Wind Waker was absolutely something vibrant and special, and still to this day, very much unlike any other game ever made, because Wind Waker, I think, more than any other Nintendo product ever produced, really emphasizes the nature, the appeal of deviating from photorealism, right? You know, Wind Waker had a very specific design in mind to make it more cartoony, more animated, more expressive, and it absolutely nailed that vibe. Wind Waker is an absolute masterpiece in artistic design, to the point where a lot of people are acknowledge the game as having aged way better visually than all the pseudo-realistic games that came out around that time period. Right? Wind Waker was an absolute masterpiece, and the same could be said for Twilight Princess, for Skyward Sword, for Breath of the Wild, and of course, Tears of the Kingdom. So, what we have here is an entire 25-year career, right? You know, supervising the Zelda franchise. You know, Aonuma got his start working on Ocarina of Time, the greatest game ever made, right? And yet, somehow, for some inexplicable reason, The Western video game world wants to pretend this guy is a fraud, that he has no real credibility, that he's been doing nothing but hold Zelda back for the past 25 years, when in reality, he's clearly a major reason why Zelda went in the direction it did. Right? He's clearly a major influence on the brand, really understands the core appeal of the franchise, understood how to grow it and evolve it past its initial audience, and yet somehow, some way, we see this sign when he goes up to accept his one game award at the Game Award Show 2023. How disrespectful of this legend, right? How dare they do this? This reminds me a lot of how, throughout Iwata's tenure at Nintendo, people disrespected him and hated all of his viewpoints. And now, after his death, there was there was that brief period of paying lip service to what a great CEO he was. But Iwata, much like Aonuma, clearly knew what was happening in the gaming industry better than anyone else, right? We've had this recent revelation from most analysts that graphics are stagnating and they're not getting better and they're not really selling games anymore, right? And Iwata has made that observation back in 2004, right? That was a major reason why Nintendo went in the direction it did, with focusing more on more vibrant, cartoony, anime-inspired visuals. Having a variety of different art styles instead of simply going for photorealism all the time, right? And because they did that, they are in a much better position creatively than their competition. Breath of the Wild would not be the game it was today if it wasn't for the risk they took with Wind Waker, right? And again, you can see Breath of the Wild, how the previous Zelda games influenced Breath of the Wild style and tone, right? You can see Wind Waker's art style, right? The more shell shaded look. You can see Twilight Princess's huge empty fields. You can see Skyward Sword's mechanics and the item usage and things like that, right? All of those games blended together to make Breath of the Wild, right? Breath of the Wild would not be what it was without those games. This guy has had an absolutely legendary career, and yet, for whatever reason, certain individuals still want to fool people into thinking this guy is a fraud. It really needs to stop. And this is, I think, one of the absolute low points of E3, the Game Awards 2023.